The night the city council voted to shut down Rikers Island, the wind rolling across the East River carried a sound inmates swore they'd never heard before: silence. Not peace. Not calm. Just a silence heavy enough to feel like the island itself was holding its breath. And if stories like this fascinate you, hit subscribe, because this one only gets darker. Rikers had seen everything: riots sparked by moldy food, guards injured during surprise searches, inmates collapsing from neglect that never made it to the official reports. But the night the news reached the cells, a different kind of tension took over. Rumors spread faster than the cold draft coming through the vents. Some inmates thought the city was lying. Others thought their transfer would be worse than anything they'd survived on the island. A few just stared at the peeling walls, wondering if the place that broke them was finally being broken itself. Down in the Georgia Virno Center, a corrections captain walked the tier with a radio pressed tight against his shoulder. He wasn't checking on anyone. He was checking on anything. Because Rikers didn't respond well to change. Each shift in policy, each outside investigation, each headline had triggered the same cycle: lockdowns, retaliation, anger boiling in spaces too small to contain it. One inmate, Ray Ortega, felt the shift before the officers did. Ray had been there long enough to know the moods of Rikers the way sailors know the sea. When the noise drops, when the eyes on the tier sharpen, when the guards stop joking with each other, that's when trouble starts. He watched a group of younger detainees whispering near the phones, palms sweating, bodies tense. They weren't planning a fight. They were planning survival. Word was spreading that the closure meant fewer staff, longer waits for medical care, and more blind corners where no one wanted to be caught alone. Rikers was a sinking ship with everyone still trapped inside. By midnight, the tension snapped. A call for backup crackled through the hallway speakers. Then another. Then a third. Metal doors slammed as officers rushed to block off a wing. The rumor was simple: someone had tried to take advantage of the chaos, someone desperate enough to make a move on arrival under the cover of uncertainty. Ray didn't see the attack, but he heard the alarms. He heard the frantic footsteps. He heard the screams echo through the ventilation shafts that were supposed to carry fresh air but mostly carried fear. And as officers rushed to contain the outbreak, a lieutenant barked an order that made the entire corridor freeze. Shut it down. All of it. Nobody in or out until we know who started this. The lockdown lights flickered, casting long shadows across the cells. Ray gripped the edge of his bunk, his pulse shaking through his hands. Because for the first time in years, the island felt unstable, not just dangerous. Unstable. And everyone on it knew that when Rikers changed, it never changed quietly. The lockdown dragged into its second hour, and the air inside the tier grew thick, hot, stale, and vibrating with the kind of tension that pushes men toward bad decisions. Rikers had always operated on an invisible system of codes and alliances, but uncertainty twisted those codes into something sharper, meaner. Nobody cared who voted to close the island. What mattered was what would happen before it closed. Ray Ortega watched through the narrow slot of his cell door as officers stormed past, searching for anything that could explain the outbreak. Contraband. Notes. Shanks. Whispers. Rikers wasn't held together by walls and fences, it was held together by secrets. And the wrong one leaking at the wrong moment could wipe out a whole tier. A corrections captain paused at Ray's cell. "You hear anything tonight?" Ray shrugged. "All I hear is panic." The captain stared at him a second too long. Not accusing, calculating. That was the problem. With Rikers set to shut down, every rank was suddenly on a different mission. Some officers wanted to keep their positions in the new borough jails. Others wanted leverage for transfers. A few wanted bonuses that weren't exactly written into any policy manual. And inmates? They wanted out before the place hit its breaking point. By the third hour of lockdown, the truth started to seep out, through hushed voices, clinking pipes, and the subtle rhythms of a jail that always talked even when mouths stayed closed. The attack wasn't random. It had started over a list. A real list. Someone had stolen the early placement roster showing which inmates were being moved first once Rikers began downsizing. Transfers meant new officers, better conditions, and distance from enemies. It was power on paper. Whoever held that list controlled the future. Ray now understood why the younger guys were whispering near the phones earlier. They weren't gossiping, they were negotiating. What unsettled him wasn't the list itself. It was the rumor that the list had been edited. Names scratched out. Names added. Favors exchanged. The kind of quiet manipulation Rikers specialized in, shifting outcomes behind locked doors. As the night ground on, pressure built. One inmate on Ray's tier cracked first, shouting through the bars that the whole closure was a setup, that nobody was getting out, that the island would stay open and swallow them whole. Officers dragged him off the unit, but his paranoia stuck to the walls like damp mold. Then came the shift, the moment everything tilted. A sergeant and the same captain from earlier marched back onto the tier, not with cuffs, but with urgency. They pulled Ray from his cell without explanation, leading him down a hallway lit by flickering bulbs. His heart slammed against his ribs, not from fear, but recognition. They weren't escorting him to medical. They weren't escorting him to intake. They were escorting him to the administrative wing. Ray realized exactly what that meant. Someone, somewhere, believed he knew where the real list was. And they needed it before the whole island tore itself apart. The walk to the administrative wing felt longer than any stretch Ray Ortega had taken across the island. Every step echoed against concrete, bouncing off metal doors, carrying the weight of a place that never forgot what it did to people. When the sergeant finally unlocked the final gate, Ray saw who was waiting for him, not another officer, not an investigator. It was a deputy warden. Behind him sat a single folder. Ray knew immediately what was inside. The deputy warden didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He didn't even look angry. He looked tired, like someone who'd spent years watching the island swallow lives and was finally seeing the walls crack under their own history. "We're out of time," he said. "The city's pushing forward with the closure. Population has to drop. Transfers start immediately. That list decides the order." Ray said nothing. "You and I both know what happens if the wrong people move first." Still, Ray stayed silent. The deputy warden slid the folder across the table. "This isn't about protecting the administration," he said quietly. "It's about preventing a war in here." Ray opened the folder. It wasn't a list. It was two lists. One was the official transfer roster. The other, handwritten, stained, clearly copied through multiple hands, was the corrupted version everyone on the tier had been whispering about. Names moved, replaced, removed. Enemies placed on the same bus. Vulnerable detainees assigned to violent blocks. Gang hierarchies shuffled like a deck of cards. Someone had used the impending closure as leverage. Someone was playing chess with real lives. And the deputy warden wanted Ray to point to the architect. Ray leaned back, the cold metal chair biting into his shoulders. He wasn't loyal to Rikers. Nobody was. The island didn't inspire loyalty, it inspired survival. But he also knew the truth, exposed the wrong person, and he'd never make it onto any transfer list. He'd get buried on the island long after the city finished tearing it down. Before Ray could answer, alarms blared again. This time it wasn't a fight. It was a breach. Someone had tried to destroy the server room where the original digital roster was stored. If they succeeded, the altered list would become the only surviving record. The chaos would decide the transfers. The deputy warden stood abruptly. "Make a choice, Ray." Ray gripped the corrupted list. His pulse thudded in his ears. For years, Rikers had bent reality, twisted reports, erased mistakes. Maybe this was the last chance to stop the island from rewriting one more truth. He pushed the handwritten list back across the table. "Start with that," Ray said. "It's not perfect, but it tells you who's scared to lose their power." The deputy warden's eyes tightened, understanding the message behind the answer. Minutes later, officers secured the server room. The official roster survived. The corrupted version died in the deputy warden's hands. Ray wasn't rewarded. He wasn't thanked. He was simply walked back to his tier as if nothing had happened, business as usual on an island that pretended not to be dying. But word spread fast. Not his name, never the name. Just the outcome. The transfers began the next morning, calm and controlled. No riots. No ambushes. No staged chaos. For the first time in decades, Rikers bent toward order instead of collapse. And Ray understood the truth: the island wasn't being shut down because it failed. It was being shut down because it couldn't change fast enough to survive its own history. If you think this story was intense, the next one will leave you speechless. Subscribe for more true crime stories that'll keep you on the edge of your seat.